everyone for your time today, talking about Oracle ULAs. We've done these open office hours in the past on various topics, but this is our first one around the ULA. There were quite a few questions that were submitted before today's session. So I want to do things a little bit differently than we normally do. So I'm not going to bore you with a big, huge PowerPoint presentation. I do have a few slides at the beginning. I got to give the little Palisade commercial and why you should probably pay attention to us around this issue. And then what I want to do is actually go through a real ULA. I want to bring one up on the screen, ULA for the city of Austin, Texas, that you can go out and do a Google search and find it out on the internet and just walk through it. And as I walk through it, we'll go through it section by section. We'll talk about why the sections are important. We specifically received a lot of questions around how to get out of the ULA, certification, avoiding an audit, avoiding future purchases from Oracle. So we'll talk about that as well. But really, I want to just get hands-on in a ULA, show it up on the screen instead of creating PowerPoints with talking points. So that's the goal for today. And like Marissa said, if you do have any questions additional that either you thought of while we were on this call today, or you did not submit before, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and then we'll go through them during this presentation or at the end. So as Marissa said, I'm the founder of Palisade Compliance. Palisade has been in the business of helping Oracle customers with their licensing and contracting, audit protection. Now we do a lot of cloud sort of advisory work. What do I do with all this Oracle stuff that I have, and how do I get to the cloud, whether it's Oracle Cloud or Google Cloud or AWS or Azure or IBM or what have you. So we are 100% independent of Oracle. Like I said, we've been doing this since 2011. Before that, I actually worked at Oracle for 16 years. I was Oracle's global vice president of contracts and business practices, customer audits. So I had about 1,000 people, more than 1,200 people working for me all around the world. Anything you bought from Oracle went through my organization. So left in 2011 and started this company to sit on the other side and really help companies with whatever challenges they have. As I mentioned, Palisade is 100% independent of Oracle. We're not an Oracle partner, we're not an Oracle reseller. The only thing we sell you is our expertise and our guidance. I've got 25 years experience in the Oracle world. Our average tenure in our contracts department at Palisade is over 20 years Oracle specific experience. We're focused completely on Oracle. We don't help with other vendors. We've got lots of technology that we've built to help analyze client data, to give really good compliance positions. In ULA case, sort of deployment positions. And we've got a really good sort of book of business and references from our clients. There's a list of some of our clients. This list is actually out of date now because we've added a few more over the last couple of weeks. Happy to say that IBM is now added as a list of our public-facing clients, but we have over 400 of them that we have been working with over the last few years. So before I get into the actual presentation, this will help guide the conversation for today. So if we have everybody who's exited a ULA, or if your ULA is just about to expire. So I'd just like to understand from the audience, where are you in your ULA journey, right? So I think of it as, we are in a ULA that's active. We had one, but we got out of it, or we've never had a ULA. Those are the big main buckets because where you are in that journey will dictate sort of what the next steps are and things that you should be doing with Oracle. So if you can all fill that out. The good news is it's never too late to sort of right the ship in your ULA journey, whether it's, we've got some that expire in August and we're just starting to help them now. So, okay, so half the group has a ULA that expires in over a year. That's good to know. So you guys are on the ball here. Normally we get folks interested in talking to us within that last year. We've got 25% who are in that space. So good, you guys are, there's no one who it expires relatively soon. And then some, I guess, never had a ULA, but you're thinking about it. Excellent. So I am going to bring up our ULA example, if you give me 1 second here. And like I said, this is from the city of Austin, Texas. And this is great because when you go to public sector contracts, they are public. So we can start looking at them. And one thing to note about this agreement here, and I'm just going to put it in a different mode here, is if you look there on the left-hand side, again, City of Austin, 100 pages or 93 pages of stuff that's out there. And that stuff is a combination of the actual contracts with Oracle, the hoops that you have to jump through with state and local government. Also, this particular agreement went through an Oracle partner or reseller. So there's sort of multiple levels of complexity here. And when we think about managing these agreements, again, if you're in procurement or IT asset management for the city of Austin, you've got this 92 pages of stuff, and it probably has 15 to 20 embedded URLs that talk about various aspects of licensing and things that sort of could be problematic or an opportunity for you, could be embedded in a URL, in a URL, in a URL. But let's get to the actual order itself. And some of the questions that we received from the audience beforehand were, they range from very sort of high level, I don't know what a ULA is, right? Can you just walk through it, to very specific questions. How do I count a virtualized environment that's in the cloud at the end of a ULA? So we're going to try to cover a lot of that material. But one thing to note is, so here's the ULA, and although this is a partner-driven third-party reseller ULA, the language that is in here is pretty indicative of what we call a template ULA. There's not much that was negotiated here. It's pretty cookie cutter. There's some specifics that have to do with how to order from the state or from the city. But the overall concepts, this ULA is what you'll see in many ULAs. Another thing to note is ULAs are highly customizable. So when you just look at this document, this is a Word document, right? So someone has to bring up a template on a computer and start typing. And obviously you've got a base template, and anything here can be changed. And that's something that I want to make clear, is that these ULAs are highly customizable, and everyone's going to be a little different. So if you're one of those folks who has a ULA, your language might exactly match this, and some of it might be very different. The other thing is the timing of the ULA. So this thing was signed 3 years ago, 2018. It actually expires at the end of this month. So if you know anyone in the city of Austin, we can definitely help them with this so they don't get audited. But the Oracle has been tightening up the language over the years. So a ULA from 2010 looks slightly different from 2013, 15, 18, even into 2020. We just helped a client sign a ULA at the end of July, and Oracle is putting new language in there. So these things are always changing because Oracle as a company is tightening things up, but then that attorney who's reviewing it at Oracle is making changes that he or she wants in there. So one thing to note about this ULA, and honestly, it's a common misconception, especially in the IT organization, an unlimited license agreement with Oracle does not mean you can use all Oracle products. it's limited to a specific set of products. In this case, there's 12 or 13 products here. Database options, middleware, Golden Gate, some other things are on here. And you're limited to that. So that's one of the gotchas in the ULA is the folks who are actually implementing the software, the technical people on the ground, hands on keyboards, usually don't read these agreements or don't have a summary of these agreements. They don't know what they're licensed for. And the way Oracle packages the delivery of their software, when you download Oracle database, you download every extra cost, feature and function and option, regardless of whether you're licensed for it. So someone in IT who makes a download and installs some software might not see this list. And often, even when you use the products, it doesn't say, hey, this is a partitioning option. Make sure you have a license for it, right? You're just sort of doing command level inputs and boom, you've triggered something that Oracle would say is a licensable event. So it's really important that when you're entering in a ULA, that first of all, everybody understands it's not for every product. It's not a limited set of products. It's a very limited set of products. It's also limited for use by a certain group. In this case, it's the city of Austin, right? So that is really important, that customer definition. In this case, from a government perspective, it's usually a little more simple than if you were a commercial enterprise. But the city of Denver has people logging in to check their taxes and make sure that log a request to fill in the potholes in the street. So are they allowed to use, are they hitting an Oracle database? Or is this really for employees of the city of Austin? What about retirees? What about benefit holders? What about other entities out there? What about the school district? All those things are things that you need to think about, not only to ensure that the ULA works for you during the 3-year term, in this case, but also make sure you can get out and certify, right? Those are the types of things that lead to audits, is when the customer definition in the ULA doesn't match the reality of who's accessing the software. Another thing to note here is, in this case, when you look at the fees, this is for license fees. The license fees are always additive. So if I look down at the bottom, there's a line that says, net technical support fees for converted and replaced licenses 2.1. So before Austin signed this ULA, they were already spending $2 million a year with Oracle on maintenance, a little bit more, which means they already spent $10 million on the license fees over X number of years. 22% of 10 million is about 2.1 million, so maybe 9.5 million. They sign a new ULA, and now every year they're going to spend the 2.1 plus the 570,000. So their new annual support is about $2.7 million going forward. So signing a new ULA with Oracle, and this is another misperception or misconception about the ULA, it never results in lower costs. Signing a ULA means you're giving Oracle more money, right? In this case, they gave them $2.6 million in license fees, plus another $570,000 a year. And those numbers, the support numbers, that 2.7 million a year, that's forever, right? Plus 3 or 4% a year on top of that for maintenance, unless you have some contractual hold. So, those are just some thoughts. If you're looking at a new ULA, you can't just get rid of your old support stream. Those folks who have a ULA that they're looking to, we want to reduce our Oracle costs, right? So you're never going to reduce your Oracle costs by signing a ULA. A ULA is additive, right? You can avoid additional costs by getting out of a ULA, and we'll talk about that as we get to the certification clause. But signing a ULA will never result in reduced Oracle costs. It'll just, you're signing it for another reason. You're growing rapidly, which would be the best reason to sign a ULA. A really bad reason to sign a ULA, which we see all the time, is you're out of compliance and you're forced to sign a ULA. So You've got a $100 million non-compliance issue. All of a sudden, a $10 million ULA looks pretty enticing. So that's a bad reason to sign a ULA, but it's something, unfortunately, and I have no idea why the city of Austin signed this. They're not a client of ours. So we talked about the customer definition. In here, it's the end user definition. Territory, again, is something that, when I look at the terms and conditions for a ULA, I'm looking at two things. Will it work for this client over the term? And will it help them get out of the ULA or prevent them from getting out of the ULA at the end? So here, their territory is US. So I'm assuming state and local government, they're not going to have people outsourced in other places accessing the software. They're not going to have it installed other places. So they're probably safe there. The total support stream, I'm going to go back and harp on that conversation. This is something that Oracle does all the time with ULAs, is they take all of your maintenance. So if you have those folks who never had a ULA, if you want to do a database ULA, they take all of your maintenance contracts and they pull them into this one, and then they add on top of that. So all of your 5 or 6 maintenance contracts that you've had over the years with Oracle, where you had some flexibility and you can terminate and reduce your costs, you're getting rid of all that flexibility and you're putting into one big bucket, this one big, Oracle calls it support stream. And that goes forever in perpetuity, never to be dissolved or broken up unless you put language in your contract that allows you to do that. And we've been very successful helping customers do that. Again, I mentioned this is a template ULA. This is something that Oracle just sort of ripped out of the book and put the customer's name on top of it and put the pricing and the products on. So there are no negotiated special terms around support and maintenance reduction and things like that. So those folks who are not in a ULA, if you're thinking about one, this is something that you should be very mindful of, is making sure you're negotiating up front, because once you're in it, you're in it. Oracle's not going to go back and say, oh, you want that better term? We're halfway through. You got it. It doesn't happen, right? You have to be able to get those terms up front. And there's all the support contracts right there that the customer has terminated over the years. And there's the cost. So all of these agreements used to be separate, and the client could terminate them and reduce their support costs. They gave City of Austin, they can't do that anymore. Right? It's all sort of lumped together. Then we get into the unlimited deployment right. And I want to talk about this in a little detail. This section C, unlimited deployment right, is critical as you're reviewing your ULAs, whether you have one or whether you're being proposed one, because this is where sort of the meat of the ULA is. It sort of talks about what you can do with the licenses, what you can't do with the licenses, and how to certify. So it'd be interesting to see where Oracle is on here. I mentioned that they have changed over the years, and this is where they've really tightened up the language and made it much more Oracle friendly. And we'll see in a second how Oracle's trying to push you to do certain things here. So the first thing, it says that you can use the products that were listed above on an unlimited number of processors that is owned or leased by you. And we'll talk about that in a second. So that's an interesting restriction. And I'm going through this real time with you guys, right? So I haven't read through this in detail because I wanted to sort of show you sort of the thinking process as you're going through this too. I didn't want this to be a canned presentation. So think about that. That's sort of the first restriction about running software in a cloud, right? It says, hey, during the term, it can only run on software that is owned or leased by you. That is something that I'm sure Oracle threw in there to restrict what the client could do with the software. That is not a regular term that we see all the time. That is a big restriction. And one of the things we want to do you want to do as you're negotiating these ULAs is look for those restrictions And Oracle wants to make it as tight as possible. You want to make it as broad as possible. So I would argue, if I was the city of Austin and they were asking my opinion on this, I was like, well, that's the first thing. During the term of the ULA, it has to be on software that is owned or leased by you. And I would say that it's even a question after the ULA expires. Can you deploy software somewhere else on some other hardware that's not owned or leased by you? And what does that mean, leased by you, right? If you're in a cloud environment, are you leasing the hardware? No. So right there, big red flag for me is, and this is even more so than most ULAs, is you're gonna have a problem. If the city of Austin in the last 3 years has deployed in the cloud, first red flag there, they're gonna have a big problem there. Okay, the second thing is, as we get into, that's what they can do with the software, and now the next section is some dates here. So it says on August 30th, 2021, unlimited period expires, right? It shall terminate, and within 30 days, you shall certify. And we'll talk about what that means, the certification. It's in the next clause. So basically, you have to tell Oracle how much stuff you're using at the end of the period, right? So if you're using 100 databases, you have until September 30th to tell them that, or September 29th. If you're using 1,000, then you have to tell them that. And then now we get into the next section, which is this B, C1B, probably the most critical clause as you're thinking about certifying your ULAs. And I'm sort of going through this, answering the questions that folks have asked before that they submitted before. So if other questions come up, if I hit something that's a point of interest to you, please don't forget to submit through the Q&A here. But let's talk about how you certify. So first of all, it says you will furnish Oracle, you have to give them a note, and it's signed by a C-level executive. And in this case, it's the quantity on which the unlimited programs are installed and running. That is a key line there, installed and running. And the reason I say that's key, and we've been talking very high level, now we're gonna get into the weeds here on certification and compliance. When you buy Oracle software, when you acquire licenses for Oracle database, if you go acquire processors, it says you have to license what's installed and or running. But when you certify, it's installed and running. So what Oracle is trying to do here is limit the number of processors during the ULA certification. So, we have 100 that are installed and running. Okay, but then after you certify, if you have a lot of stuff installed that's not running, what you need to license is installed and or running, right? So it's a compliance trap. It's much broader after certification. So you want to make sure that what you have installed and running is also installed and or running. I know I'm getting very into the weeds here, but it's the difference between certifying successfully and being trapped by a big gotcha at the end. And obviously these are things we help clients with all the time. If you go to the processor definition, and it's later in this document, I'm not going to go there right now, you'll see that and or running. So lots, and this has to do with virtualization. How do you count when you're using VMware? How do you count when you're using the cloud? So these are, and it's that one little clause, installed and running, right there. It sort of looks innocuous there, but that's really important. So let's go to the next line. So we got one gotcha right there, and let's go to the next line. And it says, notwithstanding the above, you may not include any programs in a public cloud. So think about it. Let's say City of Austin over the last 3 years have rolled out in AWS, pick one. They have 500 licenses on-prem. They have 100 licenses on AWS. Now they try to certify. They can only count 500, but they're using 600. So they've certified themselves right out of compliance. So two things to do here is number one, negotiate a better contract. This language was not in Oracle contracts in 2015. It's something as Oracle has tried to get into the cloud space. Now, the other thing that's interesting is it also doesn't call out Oracle Cloud, right? So Oracle's actually preventing this client from using the Oracle Cloud. Not that public sector is going to be using that much cloud, but you never know. So very interesting clause. So you either have to negotiate better than these guys did 3 years ago, or you need to manage properly so that you can really manage how and when you deploy to the cloud and sort of limit your exposure as much as possible during the ULA and then use elsewhere. Keep that in mind, that certification clause is critical to your success or failure of getting out of these ULAs. The other thing, and this is not, this ULA is 3 years old, but if I were to look at ULAs from today, I mentioned we did some earlier last month, Oracle has gone even further now and specifically maybe called out, you can't use this cloud, you can't use that cloud, you can't use any, just like they've done here, but you can use the Oracle cloud. They have put in further restrictions, like you're gonna work with our audit team at the end here, right? So I know a lot of people asked questions around certification and am I gonna get audited? So right here in this clause, which is, I would say the traditional certification clause, it says you certify and that's it. And lots of people, Oracle will jump into these ULAs. This thing expires this month. I am sure in the beginning of this calendar year, the Oracle audit and sales teams together, because they're one and the same, always, even if they're not, they are, they've been approaching this customer with an offer to help with the certification process. And if a client refuses that help, then they'll get a little stronger in their demands. You have to fill out this form. You have to fill out that. You have to run scripts. You have to do that. And we always push back and say, read the contract, Oracle. If it says I have to do it, I will do it. If it doesn't say I have to do it, then I ain't doing it, right? So there's lots of ways, even with the more restrictive language that Oracle's put in there, the audit language, there are plenty of ways to manage that process. It is not a guarantee that once you certify, you're going to get an official audit letter from Oracle, right? That doesn't, as a matter of fact, Palisade has never had a customer certify a ULA and get audited because Oracle knows we're there and Oracle knows we're doing it right, right? So Oracle wants to do fast audits that generate lots of money. That doesn't happen when Palisade's there, but if they think or perceive that your company doesn't have a handle on how to certify, it can go off the rails pretty quickly. So you really want to focus on that clause to determine, is there an acceptance by Oracle or is your certification? What level of cooperation do you need to provide Oracle? What document you need to give it to them, when you need to give it to them, and take a look at that cloud. You really want to look at that as well. And make sure that what you're doing in reality matches this contract. Okay, so that's the meat of an Oracle ULA. I'm going to talk about a few things here. They're sort of not in here, but I want to sort of make them known. The things I'm going to talk about now really don't affect public sector. That's why you don't see them here, but they are other things that you want to be careful of. I mentioned the customer definition. In this case, it's easy, or it's simple, City of Austin. But if you're a public traded company, private organization, you've got this massive customer definition with entity exhibits, subsidiaries, majority owned, and it's constantly changing. You've got mergers and acquisitions to worry about, mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. You have the issue of whether you're going to be acquired. All of those things you want to make sure are addressed in your ULA. Think about what happens if I'm acquired? What happens if I acquire someone? What happens if I divest someone? What happens if I merge with someone? And make sure that's called out in the contract. If you have Oracle call it out, they're going to put in some pretty restrictive language, but again, all that's negotiable. And when you're thinking about that, those clauses, always think about how does it help me over the term, and how does it help me, or how does it not prevent me from getting out at the end, right? So there's lots of things we do with our customers to have these two-tiered customer definitions, and sort of one at one point and a different one at another. But those are hard-fought, heavily negotiated terms that you all can get with your clients. But the certification process is really the meat. And then there's not much after that, right? This ULA doesn't have much to it. A lot of these things are, again, bringing in old licenses, restating licenses on here. There's one interesting thing with this particular ULA that I'm sort of give you an example of how Oracle locks you in, right? So if you read through the list of products here, and this started last year, it's fascinating if you're fascinated by anything Oracle does. Oracle Spatial and Graph. That is a database option. So this particular entity, City of Austin, has 26 licenses, and they pay an annual support fee to Oracle for those licenses, right? So whatever, I don't know what it is. In this case, it's not called out. Maybe it's, let's say, $50,000 a year. So every year they pay Oracle $50,000 a year. In November or December of last year, Oracle included that option for free in the database. So you can't buy it separate anymore. It's now included. So if you get Oracle Database Enterprise Edition, Spatial and Graph option is included. You don't pay any money for support. However, if you bought it before, you still spend that $50,000 a year. So the City of Austin is giving Oracle money for Spatial and Graph that's now free. They're paying for something that Oracle says it's free. So when we asked Oracle and sort of reached out to them, we never really got a response from them. So we had our clients reach out to them, and Oracle said, no, you got to keep paying for it. So even though Oracle says something is free publicly, it's really not free if you bought it before. So, in a perfect world, City of Austin could go to Oracle and say, hey, this is now free. Can you take it off and reduce my support fee by whatever dollars? But Oracle's going to say no to that. So I'm going to go through the list of questions, see if I missed anything. So one of them is, what's required to give Oracle when you certify out? And again, when you think about that, go back to your certification clause. And it is the certification process. It's usually C1B. That will determine, I can't say specifically because like I mentioned, all of these ULAs are very custom and you might have negotiated something different, but what you have to do is what's in there. And what you don't have to do is all the other stuff that Oracle says you have to do, right? So typically a certificate, you certify. That is the most important thing I'd like folks to know is Oracle doesn't certify you. You don't wait for Oracle to tell you how many licenses you're using. You don't wait for Oracle to accept your certification. You certify to Oracle and you tell them what the number is. And it is their IP, so you do want to give them some information so they know that you know what you're doing. But you don't have to tell them everything that's going on with your entire enterprise and fill out all those crazy spreadsheets and run those stupid scripts and do all that stuff that they want you to do unless you've agreed to that in your contract. So that is, tip number one, when you certify out, take ownership of that. The next question is, again, I mentioned that a lot of questions around how to get out of ULAs. It's interesting, not many people are asking, how do I get into a ULA? So take that for what it is. The next question is, when I exit the ULA, what can I do to avoid Oracle Cloud costs? Well, if you, again, look at that clause in terms of the cloud deployments and what you can certify and not certify. So if I'm the City of Austin and I've, done right and not deployed in the cloud, I'm not going to get hit with that. The problem is when people have a non-compliance issue, Oracle may try to resolve that issue with, buy some licenses and buy some cloud, right? So the best way to avoid unnecessary Oracle spend is to stay in compliance with your agreements, to have a plan on certification, and to have options, right? So you should only pay for Oracle Cloud when you want to use Oracle Cloud, and you should pay the price you want when you want, right? So if you're buying something, if you're buying Oracle Cloud for some other reason, then you've got a break in your process that you need to fix. So stay in compliance. Then the question comes, how do you make that decision? Do I certify or do I do another deal, right? So what we recommend, and this is important, especially if you're in the last year or 6 months of your ULA, is that last year, you go down 2 paths with Oracle. One path is you're gonna do the best certification you can. You're gonna deploy as many licenses as you can. You're gonna get that count way up as far as you can, reasonable count that you're actually installed and using. You're gonna minimize or eliminate any non-compliance. So at the end of this ULA, let's take this one for example, on August 30th, the City of Austin has deployed the maximum number of licenses they possibly can. That's path number 1. Path number 2 is you're negotiating with Oracle. So these folks should have been negotiating with Oracle since February or March, the last 6 months. What would a new deal look like with Oracle, right? So tell us about a new ULA. What terms can we get in? What products do we want to use going forward? All of those different, how can we reduce the support cost? All of those different things, and continuing those negotiations up until the end of August. And on the last day of August, you have 2 really good options. You have a new ULA, and you've done all the costing and analysis, and it's products you want, and it helps you, leap into a digital future, a cloud vision that you might want, versus holding you back, like this one looks like it does. And on the other hand, you've got the great certification. Like, I don't have to do this ULA if I don't want to do it, right? And you make a decision at the end of August. In this case, you can also make the decision in September, right? So make the decision when you're able to make it. So those are the things I look at. If you follow that process, then you will dig up the data you need to make that decision. Now, traditionally, I've been telling folks to go down that path, and I totally recommend it. And I've been very neutral on certify or renew, excuse me, except for this year, with everything that's going on in the world, COVID-19, coronavirus, we've had a sort of a shift from heavy neutral to sort of neutral certify, right? Just, if you can certify and get out, why give Oracle all this money now? You might need it next year, later this year. Especially, again, I focus on this one. Oracle's fiscal year end is the end of May. You get a better deal then anyway. I don't know when Austin's sort of fiscal years run, so they might have some budgetary reasons why things need to be done in August. But I think it's the process that's really important. If you follow that 2-pronged process on how to certify, then you'll be able to make that decision. If you just go down one path, like we're just going to certify, and then you have a gotcha at the end, that's going to be problematic for you, right? So go down both paths. At the end of the day, have really good options either way. And I use the very basic 2 options, certify or do a new ULA. There's lots of options, right? You might want to use Oracle Cloud, right? This might be a good jumping off point, or some other Oracle products, some SaaS products. So, leveraging those purchases to make the certification process easier, that could be to your benefit, right? Or doing something different. We don't need a ULA, we just need 100 licenses of this product. Great. So there's lots of different things that you can do sort of at the end of your ULA, but you have to follow the process. Process. Okay, just a couple more questions. How often do customers get audited within 12 months of exiting the ULA? And then it looks like there's one more after this. So there's 2 answers. There's few answers to that question. So the first answer is the Oracle audit team, LMS, SIA, whatever they're being called today. They change names so often. They're always going to try to insert themselves in the Oracle ULA process, in the certification process, right? So you might not get an official audit letter from Oracle, but you're going to be getting an email or a call from the Oracle audit team. So, keep that in mind. So that's sort of answer number one, is you're always going to have to deal with them. Answer number two is Palisade has never had a customer get audited within 12 months of certifying their ULA, right? It just, again, Oracle knows we're there. Oracle knows we know what we're doing. We're helping the client sort of stay in compliance. So just, the biggest risk of getting audited is non-compliance, right? If you're in compliance, you're not going to get audited. So that's answer number two. Our clients never get audited. Answer number three is maybe 40%, folks who have certified are now in more deeper audit trouble with Oracle. And I use that number because, we'll get a new client who certified without us and then got the audit letter. And now they're coming to us for help sort of way later in the process than I would like, but still at a point where we can help them. So, 40% is you're going to get, and again, it's not a bright line, hey, I got the audit letter. You're going to have conversations. I consider every interaction with Oracle an audit, right? It's just a matter of, do you pass that point where it becomes an official audit? It's like a hurricane, right? We just had a hurricane through New Jersey here this week. Category 1, Category 5, they're all hurricanes, right? So, you might just get the call from Oracle LMS, right? It's a Category 1 conversation versus you got the letter and you're running scripts and there's big problems. So just think of it that way, right? You want to be prepared. And then finally, the certification process for running in VMware. So one of the things you noticed, or maybe you didn't, there's no mention of running Oracle in a virtualized environment here. This doesn't say VMware, it doesn't say virtualized. The processor definition, which we're not seeing here on the screen, doesn't talk about running in a virtualized environment. So the challenges of counting in a virtualized environment are not specific to a ULA. They are broader challenges of whenever you use Oracle, you've got this issue, right? So and I wish there was one answer I could give you that would in one way be easier. So I could give you the Oracle answer is, well, it has to be installed and running. So you have to count physical, and then once you get out of the ULA, you're out of compliance because now it's installed and or running. That's sort of the Oracle LMS gotcha trap that they've set in there. But really, you want to make sure that you understand, what type of virtualization you're using, right? So Oracle calls it hard partitioning or soft partitioning. Even when you're using VMware, 5.x, 6.x, 7.x, x.x, right? Different rules that Oracle has, or different, I shouldn't say rules. There are different ways Oracle tries to interpret your usage of those technologies. None of them are in your contract. So that's sort of the scary part, is that it depends, but that's really the great part as well, because if it depends, that means it depends on you. As long as you're educated on the subject and you have a reasonable position that you can present to Oracle. We helped a client certify 150,000 processors of Oracle database because they were running in a virtualized environment, right? And what's Oracle going to do? They didn't like it, but we just said to Oracle, but that's how you count, right? Why would we count something else? So we always sort of, as a general rule, we start the conversation with deploy as much as you can and certify as high as you can. There's really no downside. Your support costs don't go up. If you're using things you're not licensed for, then those risks go up. So that's why you want to stay in compliance. So I think I've answered all the questions that we have. Obviously, if you are in a ULA, thinking about a ULA, you want to learn more about ULAs, We've got lots and lots of material. I would say about a third of our business is helping customers through either negotiating ULAs, managing them, or making a decision at the end, be it certify or redo the ULA. So we've got tons and tons of experience. I remember I actually drafted the first, helped draft the first Oracle ULA. So I've seen thousands of them over the years. So the Palisade compliance side of our business can actually help you. We've got tools to assess your usage of the software. We've got a team of contracts people to help you negotiate. We've got ex-LMS auditors who can help you through that process of certification with Oracle. And then for those folks who are more self-service and you just want to learn more, we've got a whole nother online business called Palisade, where you can log in and get a subscription. We've got, I think, 8 or 9 Oracle classes on there now. We're going through the second tranche of getting revised classes for 2021. I can't believe I'm saying that. But we're gonna have more classes there so you can get, sort of learn at your pace. We're all working from home these days. So this sort of self-service learning has been great for folks. So last time I will see if there's any questions. Hopefully I answered all of them that were submitted before. It doesn't look like there are more. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes of your time back. Again, I want to thank you all for today. You can go out and find that City of Austin ULA. There's 5 or 6 of them that I found within the last week. If you really want to see the progression of Oracle ULAs, visit our website. We've got lots of white papers on managing ULAs. And please give us a call if you need some help. So thanks everyone for your time and have a great day, everybody. Good luck with Oracle.